The words came out so matter-of-factly that Steve Harvey almost didn't register the contradiction at first. "We've been homeless for 5 years. We sleep under the downtown bridge." 58-year-old Susan Williams had answered the question about their living situation with the tired resignation of someone who had accepted an impossible reality, but it was what she said next that would stop Family Feud completely and expose one of the most bewildering cases of mental illness ever witnessed on television. "My husband Michael has millions of dollars in the bank, but he won't let us use any of it." The studio fell into the kind of confused silence that comes when people hear something that doesn't make logical sense. Michael Williams, 58 years old and dressed in clothes that were clean but clearly worn, stood frozen at the family podium, staring at his wife with an expression of absolute terror. "Susan," he whispered, his voice shaking, "you can't tell them about the money. If we talk about it, it'll disappear." It started as another Friday afternoon taping in Atlanta. The Williams family from Seattle faced off against the Rodriguez family from Miami. The Williams family was exactly the kind of contestants that made for compelling television. Humble, grateful to be there, with the kind of authentic appreciation that came from people who didn't take opportunities for granted. But there was something about their appearance that caught Steve Harvey's attention immediately. Their clothes were clean but threadbare. Their shoes were worn but polished. Everything about them suggested people who took pride in their appearance despite having very little. Michael Williams moved with the careful precision of someone who was constantly checking and rechecking everything around him. He counted his steps, touched surfaces in specific patterns, and kept pulling out a small notebook to write things down. Susan stood beside her husband with the protective energy of someone who had learned to navigate around another person's fragile mental state. During family introductions, Steve had been immediately drawn to their dynamic. "And who do we have here?" Steve had asked, approaching their podium with his trademark warmth. "I'm Susan Williams, and this is my husband Michael. We're from Seattle, Washington." "Susan and Michael, how long have you two been married?" 35 years. Susan had replied with genuine warmth. "Best 35 years of my life." Michael had smiled at this, but Steve noticed he was counting something under his breath and writing in his notebook. "That's beautiful. What do you do for work?" "I used to be an accountant," Michael had said. "Now I manage investments." It was a perfectly reasonable answer, but there was something in Susan's expression that suggested the reality was more complicated. "And Susan, what about you?" "I take care of Michael," she had said simply, "full time." Again, nothing unusual on the surface, but Steve sensed there was more to the story. Now, 4 rounds into the game, that story was about to explode into something that would challenge everyone's understanding of mental illness, money, and the bizarre ways trauma can manifest. The Williams family was doing surprisingly well, leading by 20 points heading into the final round. Steve was in his element, making jokes about Grandmother Williams's surprisingly sharp answers and Uncle Tom's tendency to overthink every question. The category was things that make you feel secure. It was Susan's turn at the podium. She had stepped forward with the weary confidence of someone who had learned to handle difficult situations with grace. "All right, Susan, things that make you feel secure. What do you think?" Susan gripped the podium, and for the first time all day, her composed facade began to crack. "Having a home," she said, her voice carrying years of accumulated exhaustion. The answer was number 1 on the board. Worth 28 points. The Williams family should have been celebrating, but Susan hadn't moved from the microphone. She was looking at her husband with an expression that carried the weight of years of frustration and heart. "Susan," Steve said, approaching the podium, "having a home. That's important to everyone. Tell me about your home." That's when Susan's composure broke completely. "We don't have a home, Mr. Harvey. We've been homeless for 5 years." The studio audience gasped audibly. This family, who had been playing the game with such dignity, was homeless. "But," Susan continued, her voice growing stronger with desperation, "my husband has $2.4 million in bank accounts that he refuses to touch." The silence that followed was deafening. Steve Harvey had witnessed countless unexpected moments over his career, but this was something entirely unprecedented. "Susan," he said carefully, "I need you to help me understand what you just said." Michael had gone completely pale. He was clutching his notebook to his chest like a shield. "Susan, please don't," he whispered. "If we talk about the money, the numbers will change. If the numbers change, it'll all disappear." Steve looked between husband and wife, beginning to understand that he was witnessing something much more complex than financial disagreement. "Michael, you believe you have $2.4 million? "I know I have it," Michael said firmly. "I check the accounts every day. I write down the numbers, but I can't touch it. If I touch it, if I spend even $1, the whole system will collapse." Susan stepped closer to her husband, her voice filled with years of accumulated pain. "Mr. Harvey, Michael was an accountant for 30 years. He was brilliant with numbers, with investments, with money management. But 7 years ago, he had a nervous breakdown." The studio was completely silent now. "He became convinced that our money was connected to some kind of cosmic balance, that if he spent any of it, the universe would take it all away." Behind the scenes, a producer made a decision that would define this moment forever. Keep the cameras rolling. Let America witness what severe anxiety and OCD can do to a family. "Michael," Steve said gently, "how often do you check these accounts?" "Every hour," Michael replied without hesitation. "I have to make sure the numbers are still there. I have to write them down in the correct order, or they might disappear." He opened his notebook, revealing pages and pages of numbers, dates, and calculations, all written in obsessively neat handwriting. "See? $2,400,347.63 as of this morning at 11 a.m. Steve looked at the notebook, then at Susan, then back at Michael. "And you believe that if you spend any of this money, it will all disappear?" "Not believe, Mr. Harvey, I know. The last time I tried to withdraw money, the balance went down. That's proof that spending money makes money disappear." Susan let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "Michael, that's how bank accounts work. When you spend money, the balance goes down. That's normal." "No," Michael said firmly. "That's the system trying to trick me. That's why I can't touch it anymore." Steve Harvey had hosted thousands of shows, but this was uncharted territory. This was severe mental illness that had trapped a family in poverty despite having significant wealth. "Susan, where do you sleep?" "Under the Aurora Bridge in Seattle. There's a community there. People know us. They look out for us." "And you eat?" "Food banks, soup kitchens. Sometimes Michael's brother sends us grocery cards, but Michael won't let me use them because he thinks spending money will affect his accounts." The studio audience was openly emotional now. This wasn't just about mental illness. This was about how untreated anxiety can destroy lives in the most bizarre ways possible. "Michael," Steve said, "what would happen if Susan used money to get you an apartment?" Michael's panic was immediate and visible. The accounts would crash. All the money would disappear. We'd have nothing. "Don't you understand? The only way to keep the money safe is to never touch it." "But if you never touch it, how is it helping you?" "It's there," Michael said, as if this explained everything. "It exists. It's safe. That's what matters." Steve turned to Susan. "How long has this been going on?" 7 years. The first 2 years, I tried to convince him to use the money. I begged, pleaded. I showed him how bank accounts actually work. But every time I mentioned spending money, he would have panic attacks. "So you gave up?" "I chose to take care of my husband instead of fighting with him. I chose love over money." The studio was witnessing something extraordinary. A woman who had chosen 5 years of homelessness rather than abandon her mentally ill husband. But Steve Harvey wasn't done. "Michael, can I ask you something? What if I called your bank right now and checked your account balance with you?" Michael's face went white with terror. "No, you can't call them. If they know we're talking about the money, they might take it away." "But what if I promised you that just checking the balance wouldn't make it disappear?" "You don't understand the system, Mr. Harvey. The system is very fragile. One wrong move and Evan collapses." Steve looked at Susan, who nodded encouragingly. "Susan, would it help if we could prove to Michael that checking his account balance is safe?" "Mr. Harvey, we've tried everything. Therapists, medications, financial advisors. Nothing has worked." Steve pulled out his cell phone. "Michael, I'm going to make a call. Not to your bank, just to a mental health specialist. Someone who understands anxiety disorders. Is that okay? Michael was visibly sweating now. As long as they don't touch the money, as long as they don't change the numbers. Steve's first call was to Dr. Sarah Martinez, a psychiatrist who specialized in anxiety and OCD. Dr. Martinez, this is Steve Harvey. I have a man here who has millions of dollars but is living homeless because he's afraid that spending money will make all his money disappear. The conversation lasted several minutes with Steve taking notes and asking questions. After the call, Steve approached Michael and Susan. Michael, Dr. Martinez wants to help you. She says what you're experiencing is actually very common among people with severe anxiety disorders. She doesn't understand the money system, Michael protested. Actually, she does. She's worked with dozens of people who have exactly the same fears about money. Steve turned to address the studio audience. Ladies and gentlemen, what we're witnessing here is how mental illness can trap people in impossible situations. Michael isn't choosing to be homeless. His brain is telling him that using money is dangerous. But Steve wasn't finished.
Michael, what if I told you there was a way to use your money that wouldn't make it disappear? A way that actually follows the system you're worried about?
That's impossible, Michael said, but there was a hint of curiosity in his voice. What if instead of spending your money directly, we set up a system where other people manage your expenses while you monitor the accounts?
Michael considered this. Like a buffer?
So I'm not directly touching the money. Exactly like a buffer. For the first time since the conversation began, Michael seemed slightly less panicked, but I would still need to check the accounts every hour. Of course, you could check them as often as you need to. Susan was crying now, but they were tears of hope rather than despair. Michael, would you be willing to try that? If it meant we could have an apartment? Michael looked at his notebook, then at Susan, then at Steve. The numbers would still be safe. The numbers would still be there, Steve confirmed. Michael closed his notebook carefully. I miss having a bed. I miss having a place to take a shower. Susan reached for her husband's hand. I miss cooking dinner for you. Steve felt tears forming in his eyes. This wasn't just about money or mental illness. This was about love persisting through impossible circumstances. Michael, Susan, I want to help you set up this system. I want to connect you with people who understand how to work with anxiety disorders and financial management. The episode, when it aired 6 weeks later, became one of the most discussed in Family Feud history. Mental health organizations reported a significant increase in calls from people struggling with money-related anxiety disorders. More importantly, Michael and Susan's story sparked conversations about how severe anxiety can manifest in ways that seem illogical but feel completely real to the person experiencing them. The transition to housing was gradual and carefully managed. Dr. Martinez worked with Michael to develop coping strategies for using money without triggering his panic responses. They started small, Susan buying groceries while Michael watched the account balances on his phone to confirm that normal spending didn't make money disappear. 6 months later, Michael and Susan appeared on Steve Harvey's talk show to share their progress. They were living in a modest apartment in Seattle. Michael still checked his account balances multiple times a day, but he was learning to tolerate the natural fluctuations that come with normal spending. The hardest thing to accept, Michael said during the interview, was that my brain was lying to me about how money works. But the beautiful thing was that Susan never stopped believing I could get better. Susan added, the money was never the real problem. The problem was the fear. Once we started treating the fear, the money became just numbers again. Steve learned something that day that changed how he approaches every person who steps onto his stage. He learned that sometimes the most illogical situations make perfect sense when viewed through the lens of mental illness, and that love can survive even the most impossible circumstances. Michael still keeps his notebook, but now it contains more than just bank balances. It contains records of rent payments, grocery receipts, and other evidence that spending money is safe and normal. The apartment they live in now isn't luxurious, but it's home. Susan has a kitchen where she can cook. Michael has a desk where he can manage his notebooks and check his accounts without being exposed to weather. Most importantly, they have privacy, dignity, and proof that mental illness doesn't have to be a life sentence. Steve Harvey still keeps a photo on his desk from their follow-up appearance. It shows Michael and Susan in their new apartment, both smiling with the kind of relief that comes from finding safety after years of fear. The note attached reads, "Mr. Harvey, thank you for showing us that being rich isn't about having many. It's about having the freedom to use what you have. We're finally rich, because sometimes the poorest people are those who have everything but can't use it. Sometimes the richest people are those who have learned that security comes not from hoarding resources, but from being able to access them when needed. And sometimes love means sleeping under a bridge with someone rather than abandoning them to their fears." The homeless millionaire found his home not in an apartment, but in the understanding that his mind could heal, his fears could be managed, and his wife's love was the greatest wealth he'd ever possessed. That's not just good television. That's the power of compassion to transform mental illness from a prison into a problem that can be solved with patience, understanding, and professional help. Because mental illness doesn't discriminate based on bank account balances, and healing doesn't require wealth, it requires hope. And sometimes hope comes in the form of a game show host who refuses to accept that impossible situations can't be changed.